Good morning, all, and thank you for joining me today to listen to a presentation on one of my personal favourite cruise destinations, made up of 3 true expedition itineraries covering the South Australian coast and across the Great Australian Bight to enjoy the spectacular tip of Western Australia. My name is Will. I'm a member of the sales team here at Coral Expeditions, calling you today from our Cairns head office. And look, having experienced many of the highlighted destinations that we visit across these voyages, I can speak from a certain personal experience when I say it's a truly special part of the world. And if you're looking to get away from the crowds and visit areas that are hard, if not impossible, to reach by road, and see some of Australia's best wildlife, beaches and spectacular coastlines, all while enjoying the culinary highlights of the region, then you've come to the right place. However, I can't class myself as a true expert in the region. And so you'll be happy to know that we have one of our guest lecturers, Peter Canty, joining us today to provide the expertise that Coral Expeditions are known for providing, whether that be on the south coast, in the Kimberley and beyond, both domestically and in international waters. I'll introduce him to you shortly later in the presentation. And just in terms of, we have a short Q&A session at the end. If throughout the presentation you have any questions, please chuck them into the chat function on your laptop, and we will try and address as many of these between me and Peter at the end of the presentation. I've got a little list of pre-supplied questions that you guys have asked, and again, we'll try and address these at the end. So look, South Australia's islands and Gulf waters are some of the best kept secrets of the Australian coastline, with over 5,000 kilometres of practically deserted shoreline and more than 300 islands. This region offers a diversity of natural wilderness, including spectacular bays, remote islands and stunning sea cliffs. And best of all, it remains wild and unspoilt. Many of the islands are important sanctuaries for birds, kangaroos, wallabies, seals, sea lions. And along the way, you'll indulge in the tastes of South Australia with fresh local seafood and wines, complemented with our traditional warm Australian hospitality on Australian-owned, flagged and crewed, purpose-built small expedition vessels, with the caveat that we also allow a few Kiwi crew on board as well. Leaving South Australian waters, we're going to be highlighting itineraries that provide the full immersion into the flora, fauna, rich history and unique coastlines of Australia's southwest. And for most, it represents a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to cross the Great Australian Bight, with the voyage visiting hard-to-reach islands, iconic national parks along the south coast and southwestern peninsula of WA. You'll get to enjoy guided walks along vast and secluded beaches at locations such as Cape Le Grand and Bremer Bay, whilst visiting the scattered islands and outcrops of the Recherche Archipelago, where you'll discover, remote breeding grounds of sea lions and follow the snorkel trail at Shearwater Bay to try and spot the elusive leafy sea dragon and obviously all the other underwater life. As we round the southwestern edge of Australia, you'll enjoy time ashore with sunset drinks at Woody Island, a visit to the truly stunning Jewel Cave, swimming with stingrays at Hamlin Bay and walk amongst the vines, and probably most importantly, sample the wines of the Margaret River region with a focus on the Lewin Estate vineyards and their famous art series of wines over there. So look, if you've travelled with Coral Expeditions before, you'll be more than aware of the type of travel and the ethos of our kind of travel that we offer. But Coral Expeditions have been in business now for 40 years. Indeed, we celebrated our 40th anniversary a couple of weeks or so ago. And for those 40 years, we've operated with a singular purpose: to take small groups of like-minded explorers to some of the most remote places in Australia and beyond, with expert guidance and warm Australian hospitality. And so what is the expedition experience that we offer, no matter it being in the Kimberley, the South Coast and beyond? And again, for those of you who have cruised with us, you're going to be more aware of what we offer and the style of travel that we offer to you guys. If you're looking for multiple bars, restaurants, nightclubs, casinos, white jacketed waiters, then coral expeditions, a coral cruise is probably not what you're looking for. Instead, we offer an informal, relaxed onboard experience with no dressing for dinner, no assigned seating, and no formal entertainment outside our schedule of guest lectures and presentations from our guest lecture and expedition leader team, and obviously specific to the waters in which you cruise. The whole ethos of the company is to focus on the stunning destinations we visit rather than the ship itself. And that's a very different prospect from some of the big ship cruise lines out there. Most days we offer a minimum of 2 shore excursions, and we utilize our trademark explorer tenders, which I'm going to come on to in a bit more detail shortly, to ensure your time is maximized ashore with absolutely no waiting or queuing. Our shore excursions are tailored to all, no matter the levels of fitness. And so we offer our guests, anything from a strenuous hike to a site of interest or viewpoint, through to a gentler beachcomb or exploration of the area. In suitable locations, we also offer the chance of staying aboard our explorer tenders to cruise through the bays, islands, and coastlines. Again, geared for those not inclined to head ashore. The point being that we offer a range of excursion opportunities to fit all fitness requirements and specific areas of interest. And again, all shore excursions are accompanied by our expert expedition team. And crucially, we do not outsource to third parties, meaning we can guarantee the quality of the ashore expedition experience. And so moving on to one of the most important facets of a coral expedition cruise, our explorer tenders. Again, for those who have cruised with coral previously, you're going to be more than aware of the merits of our what we call safari jeeps of the sea, and they are truly unique. They've been purpose built and designed by Coral to provide that perfect conduit between our ships and the remote regions we visit, be that in the Kimberley here on the south coast, and on all our domestic and international itineraries. And it's something that literally no other cruise line, domestic or international, can offer. Our explorers are really easy to board directly from the deck with no steps or ladders to contend with before being lowered gently into the water, and they provide comfortable padded seating, a full audio system to assist our guides in sharing their expert commentary. They have a canopy overhead that protects you from, what could be, pretty hot sun and occasional rain and thunderstorms. And there's a toilet for remote convenience. This might not sound like a big deal, but it's crucial to avoid having to constantly head back to the mothership, and potentially avoids the need to find a suitable bush or have a quick dip in the ocean. In short, our explorers are crucial in allowing us to deliver a true expedition product. They allow easy access not only to beach and harbour landings, but provide the perfect option for exploring bays, rivers and coastlines, as well as doubling up as an excellent scuba and snorkel platform where applicable. They allow us to on and off board our entire ship's complement in under 15 minutes, which again means more time spent enjoying the areas that you guys have paid a considerable amount of money to experience. Aboard Coral Adventurer and Coral Geographer, which I'll come on to shortly, which are the 2 vessels we use for this cruise series in 2023 and next year in 24. Both of those ships have 2 explorers, which, as mentioned, can be boarded directly off the ship's coral deck before being gently lowered into the water, making it easily accessible for all guests. They come equipped with 2 powerful engines and can reach up to 20 knots in speed, allowing us to cover large distances in far more comfort than the Zodiacs or Tinnies, in for lack of another word, utilised by other cruise lines. That being said, it's also important to mention that on all our expedition cruise itineraries and across all vessels in the fleet, we complement our explorers with the more traditional Zodiac inflatables, and our guests have the option, where applicable, to enjoy these Zodiacs to further explore the diverse regions in which we travel. However, as anybody knows who's ever jumped aboard a Zodiac, they come with far less creature comforts than our Explorer tenders, with no protection from the elements, and with some of our shore excursions, taking up multiple hours and covering quite long distances. Utilizing our Explorers in conjunction with the Zodiac option means we can exclusively offer this combination to allow our guests the flexibility and choice, no matter how adventurous or not, as the case may be, that they are. And so on to our ships. So as mentioned, we use two of our vessels for this expedition cruise itinerary, Coral Adventurer and Coral Geographer, which I'll come on to shortly. So CA and CG, which we tend to refer to them as, are sister ships, and they're our two newest ships of the fleet. Coral Adventurer, that you can see up on the screen, launched in late 2019, has a maximum number of guests on board of 120 across 60 staterooms. There's a whole range of information available on our website in terms of ship layouts, additional images, that type of thing. I won't go into the kind of minutiae too much on this presentation. All you really need to know that every single one of our staterooms is outward facing, all en suite, and many, as you can see from the images there, have private balconies. They're designed specifically, like I say, to provide that kind of short, small ship expedition experience. There's a large range of both kind of indoor and outdoor areas to relax and soak up the vistas on view. This picture is particularly good because it shows the kind of hydraulic platform on our Explorer tenders. So again, easy access to board those tenders, and then it gets lowered down off the back of the ship, and then away you go. Coral Geographer is our newest ship in the fleet and was launched in late 2021. But again, both CA and CG practically mirror images of each other. Both these ships have an internal elevator lift on board. So if you've got, any kind of physical constraints, you are welcome to use the lift. We do ask, and it's already been asked for one of the questions, how mobile do you have to be? Whilst, yeah, you're absolutely welcome to use the lift, you do have to be able to use stairs in the event of an emergency when the lifts are not working. But again, similar to Coral Adventurer, Coral Geographer, maximum 120 people on board. All our staterooms are outward facing, all en suite. Again, loads of private balcony options available as required. And these are the two ships that we utilize across the South Coast cruise series over the next couple of years. And so it brings me on to our guest speaker today, Peter Canty. So look, Peter's relatively new to joining Coral. He did our South Australian Coastal Wilds cruise series last year, so he's just in our second year. But he comes off the back of a wide and a depth of knowledge in the local area. He's a South Australian local, spent 43 years, I believe, in the South Australian Parks and Wildlife Service. His specialty is the botany of the area, but also has a pretty in-depth knowledge of endangered mammals and reptiles of the area, and is also a keen, if not amateur, but a very keen photographer. So he's very keen to kind of impart his local knowledge, and is a perfect example of the type of guest lecturer that we like to have on board, specific to the local cruise areas in which we travel. So over to you, Peter. Feel free to introduce yourself, and then we'll move on to the first slide when you're ready.
Thank you, Will, and good morning, everybody, from chilly Crafers high in the Adelaide Hills. Yes, I was invited to come on my very first coral trip last year. That was, in fact, my very first time on a cruise ship whatsoever. So it was a very interesting experience for me. Very early on in my career, back in the late 70s and early 1980s, I was one of the main authors of a book called South Australia's Offshore Islands that was published in the early 1990s. Unfortunately, it's long out of print now, though you can still get it from the department online as a electronic download, so you can always check that out if you're interested in more information. But I'm probably only one of two people to have set foot on pretty much all of South Australia's offshore islands. I think we visited something like 150 of them over the period of time we did the work. And I'm fairly confident in saying I'm probably one of the few who've set foot on all of them, because some of them we could only get to using a helicopter. So although we don't have access to that resource on these trips, we will still get to set foot on some of these amazing places. And some of them look exactly the same as they did when people like Matthew Flinders and Nicholas Baudin first saw them hundreds of years ago. So for me, the whole experience was both a journey back in time so that I could revisit some of these places that I hadn't been to for 40 years plus in some cases, and also to experience that through the vehicle of a cruise ship, which I'd never done before. And it just blew my mind to be able to use those explorers to get access to some of these areas that most people don't get anywhere near or don't have the opportunity to visit, and then go back at night and have all these wonderful 5-star meals and be surrounded by a whole group of like-minded passengers who are there to explore, experience nature and find out more. It was just a really exciting, energising activity to do, and I was really blown away and enjoyed every minute of it. So very much looking forward to getting back out there again.
Thank you, Peter. So look, without further ado, guys, we have our first kind of highlighted itinerary of the presentation, and one of my personal favourites, the wild islands of South Australia. We've been running this trip for many, many years now. It's a 10-night Adelaide to Adelaide trip. Departs November and December this year in 2023, and then October and November next year. So without further ado, we're just going to cover some of the main highlights of the trip, not exclusively. And again, we provide full detailed itineraries and information live on our website. So please feel free to peruse to your heart's content. But just kicking straight off with the first highlight. Over to you, Peter.
One of the things I love about the islands and just the general landscapes off our coast is that we face directly into the Southern Ocean. So basically, the next piece of land south of us is the Antarctic. So you've got a lot of wild seas pounding the coast. On the seaward side, you've got very spectacular cliffs and erosional features. On the more sheltered sides, you've got wonderful sandy beaches and sheltered places to pull up anchor and go exploring. So you've got those wonderful contrasts. And one of the things that I like to convey on these trips is just that sense of how these landscapes have evolved over time. Like we've got in some of the granite rocks in these coastlines, we've got some of the oldest rocks in the world. And in the capping limestones, we've got some of the more recent ones dating back from the last ice age, when all these islands were connected to the mainland. So we can tell, well, I like to tell a story of deep time where we go back millions of years and look at some of the evidence of what happened during those times, which is, you know, if you don't know what you're looking at, you walk straight past some of these things. But I get a lot of pleasure in pointing out some of these features to the guests, and then looking at some of the more modern things, how these pieces of land which were once island mountains became cut off by the sea. Their wildlife got cut off, and those that survived and those that didn't survive, and how that's reflected in their appearance today. One of the first places we visited on our last trip was Antechamber Bay, which is a lovely sheltered section of the eastern end of Kangaroo Island. This is Cape Willoughby Lighthouse. We spend a whole day in this area. There's 2 parts of the day. You can either choose to do a walk on the beach for half the day, and then the other half of the day you can go up and have a special tour of the lighthouse, and you can reverse that either in the morning or the afternoon to do. So make sure you get to do both those things. A lot of European history and Aboriginal history is in this area as well, and depending on the expertise of the other guest lecturers, we can weave in all those stories into your visitor experience, which, you know, I found really mind-blowing. Next. One of the special things about a lot of these islands is when they were cut off by the sea after the last ice age, a lot of mainland animals were trapped there, and there's been enough time passed, in some cases 10,000 up to 17,000 years. Some of these animals have evolved differences to their mainland counterparts. And sadly, because of our changes to the mainland on some of the islands, some populations of animals only exist on these island refuges now, so they're very important for conservation. And because of our access to these islands using the explorers, we can land. We're not just looking at them from the sea in the distance. We get first-hand experience with the wildlife. Kangaroo Island has its own particular subspecies of western grey kangaroos. They're darker in colour and a bit fluffier than their mainland counterparts. And like a lot of island species, particularly for the early explorers, they hadn't had contact with humans, so they were quite tame and relatively unafraid to come up close, and that's still very much the case in a lot of places these days. Kangaroo Island is special because it's got no foxes and no rabbits on the island, so there are a lot of species that survive there that aren't on the mainland, and certainly not in large numbers, so you can get a unique wildlife experience just wandering around Kangaroo Island. Next. Kangaroo Island is also our largest offshore island as well, so that's why it's included in these tours, and it also has some other benefits of civilization, including nice food and wines and gins and whiskies and things like that. So I'm not sure whether we get to taste any of those things on trips. There was certainly very much a focus on the trip that I was on for having local produce and local wines and beverages from the state to match up with food on the ship. So that was another part of the wonderful part of the experience. Being on a ship, you also get to see marine things. So we're spoilt in a sense. We're out on a ship, so we get to see, if we're lucky, marine species, and we can land and see all the terrestrial ones as well. Quentin Chester, who was one of the guest lecturers I shared the trip with, he's a long-time guest lecturer, and he knew that whenever you came into an embayment or land for the first time, particularly early in the morning as the ship was coming in to drop anchor, if you got up to the bow of the ship, you could often have pods of dolphins racing along on the bow, and he took some fantastic photos looking down at these dolphins using the push of the ship to surf along in front. It was amazing. And as I said, the islands have a lot of special wildlife, in some cases sadly no longer found on the mainland. So depending on where we go, and that's often at the whims of the weather, but that's part of the adventure. We'll get to see some of these amazing animals, and often up quite closely. Next. One of the special things about being near the sea, and one of the special things about South Australia, is our seafood industry. Particularly over on Eyre Peninsula, we visit South Australia's second largest island, which is Flinders Island. It was and still is basically used for farming, but the current generation of owners, the Woolfords, have very ecological minded. They're trying to change the island from a farming island to an ecotourism island. They want to restore the native vegetation, and working with the department that I used to work for to reintroduce some of those species that have been lost from some of the offshore islands there. But one of the things they also do is they run an abalone harvesting industry, also very sustainably. Last year they won the Premier's Food and Beverage Award for their business. And we have the pleasure of landing on Flinders Island and meeting the family and getting first-hand experience of actually tasting abalone. And if you're like many people, you haven't actually eaten abalone before, they're delicious. If you're not into sort of shellfishy seafood, these don't have a really fishy taste, and they cook them in a variety of ways. We have a bit of a barbecue on the beach. It's just a fantastic location. The family are really welcoming and informative, and the abalone are just delicious. So it's something I particularly look forward to doing again. Next. Point Sir Isaac is one of the most remotest parts of Coffin Bay Peninsula. It's basically all national park, pretty much a wilderness area. If you're on the mainland, it's a very difficult four-wheel drive trek to get out there, but because we're in one of the coral ships and we've got the explorers, we can just drop anchor anywhere we like in a sheltered, secluded beach and land, and we basically have the whole place to ourselves. Last time we did some wonderful beach walks there. As I say, my particular interest is in botany, so we were keeping a close eye out. There's some beautiful coastal heaths there. Lots of plants were flowering. We're there in late spring, but there's always something interesting to find from a botanical perspective. There were interesting birds around, and we saw some kangaroos, and there's even a chance we might see echidnas or other interesting animals as well. So you never know what you're going to see, but because you're in a remote location and we're just walking gently through the landscape, we're not being noisy with vehicles or anything like that, there's a much greater chance of seeing wildlife and having a unique experience. Next. Going back to Kangaroo Island, as I mentioned earlier, while one group is touring up at Cape Willoughby Lighthouse, I usually, last year I led a group for a walk along a bit of Antechamber Bay, and part of that is walking into Lashmar Conservation Park, which is adjacent to the bay. It's on the mouth of the Chapman River, so you have a whole range of different habitats. You've got the fresh water from the Chapman River running into the sea. You've got that big expanse of ocean beach. You've got all this pristine native vegetation coming down as well, so there's a really good chance of seeing some interesting wildlife as well as beautiful vegetation. Last time we were wandering along the beach, we saw some endangered hooded plovers nesting there, so that was a big tick. And we also saw a Rosenberg's goanna wandering around through the undergrowth near the Chapman River, so that was pretty good as well. And there's also some very interesting geology in the area too, which when Quentin pointed out to me, it just blew my mind. So I'm very excited to be able to share those stories with visitors as well next time we're there. And in the distance, you can just see the mainland in that photo. So we're not too far from mainland South Australia. In fact, Kangaroo Island is actually a continuation of the Mount Lofty Ranges. So there's a bit of geological history that's very interesting there that we can talk about when we're doing the tours. Next. We also poke our nose up into Spencer Gulf. This is Cape Donington, which is a part of Lincoln National Park. Last time when I did the trip up into this part of the world, at the same time Adelaide was having all these huge storms. So we had a very interesting itinerary on the ship. We were constantly changing our route, and at night I'd be reading my offshore island book, confident that we were going to this location the following day, and then I'd go down for breakfast, and the captain would say, oh, due to the wind direction and the seas, we're now parked offshore at this location. So I thought, oh, well, rapidly go through my book and reading up on where we were. But that's part of the adventure, and the beauty about Lincoln National Park, it's a very complicated coastline. There are lots of sheltered bays. There are about over 70 kilometres worth of walks in the national park. So no matter what the weather's doing, there's always a sheltered place we can find to drop anchor and do a wonderful walk or two. Last time we went up to Stamford Hill, which is probably one of the highest points we can reach on the trip. People had the choice of doing a gentler walk along the beach or getting a bit of exercise, walking up to the top of the hill and having some extensive views over Port Lincoln Harbour. The whole area is just dotted with offshore islands, so it's just very spectacular. You feel like you're out in the middle of the wilderness. The walks, you don't have to worry about having to really thrash yourself and get worn out. My interest is in botany. My family always complain that I take ages to do any walk because I'm always looking out for photos and finding interesting plants and animals. So if you want to walk with me, I'll always be finding interesting things to share with you and point out. Last time, one of the other guest lecturers, Jock, and I did a bit of a walk and a talk on some of the native plants that could be used for food. So we were looking at berries, edible berries, and even some of those that are used on Kangaroo Island these days to make gin flavoured with native plants. So that was an interesting aspect to some of our walks in this part of the world. Next. One of the best things about being on the coast is you come up close and personal with some of our special members of the seal family. The only endemic member of the seal family that lives in Australia is the Australian sea lion. Unfortunately, they are endangered, but our offshore islands provide a an opportunity to get up close and personal with them. Some of their haul out areas and breeding areas are on our offshore islands. Last time we circled some of these places in our tenders, and the young animals in particular were very curious and came up quite close to the boat. So it's a fantastic way to get good photographs of these animals close up, and they sit out on the rocks and bask and enjoy the warm sunlight. So they're quite easy to just use the explorers to sneak up and get close to without disturbing them. It's a good idea if you've got a telephoto lens and camera to bring it along, but if you don't have those, even just a pair of binoculars can greatly enhance the experience. If we're also lucky, we'll see long-nosed fur seals as well. They almost hunted to extinction by the skin trade back in the early 1800s, but they're having an exponential recovery to their population, so they're doing really, really well these days, and generally we can see a lot more of those than the Australian sea lions, and we can have a bit of a look at why those two populations are doing so differently when we do the tours. Next. As I say, getting up close and personal with wildlife is one of the special things about these trips. You never know what you're going to see. Last time I was doing a walk in Lincoln National Park, and we had a father emu with a group of chicks. The fathers do all the parenting in the emu family, and they wandered past us, so we had a good close-up look of those. Many years ago, when I was working with Aboriginal elders in Central Australia, they showed me a trick for attracting emus, which they used to use as a hunting technique to draw them in. So I did that to keep the emus' interest up so that they'd hang around for photos. And if we're lucky, I'll get a chance to do that again on this trip. You often see animals on the beaches. Could just be because it's much easier to walk along the beach and cover a big distance than it is thrashing your way through the vegetation in the coastline. But they're also curious animals as well, and will come up and check things out. So it's often the case with the kangaroos as well. Next. Part of, like I said, I really get into talking about the islands and the places we visited in a sense of deep time, but we also go back to relatively recent times, not millions of years ago, but hundreds of years ago. We talk about some of the earliest explorers to have visited these coasts. Matthew Flinders is one of the most important ones because he produced very accurate maps of our coastline, which stood in good stead for a very, very long time. And his story is a very, very interesting one. He was only 28 years old when he did this trip. And these days, it would be equivalent to someone having an expedition to the moon or Mars. It was just so remote, and I have nothing but admiration for what these people did. On Matthew Flinders' journey, he had a botanist called Robert Brown, and I have a particular interest in his work. When I was visiting some of the offshore islands earlier on in my trips, there were specimens collected by Robert Brown, and they're still held in the South Australian Herbarium. So I've seen some of the plants that he held in his hand and cut off plants. And I went back to some of those islands to try and re-find those species that he found on those original trips. In some cases, I couldn't find them, which was interesting. In other cases, I did. So there had been some changes over those couple of hundred years, but not others. But yes, as we travel along, we can point out some of the adventures of Matthew Flinders. In one instance, he lost 7 of his crew in a disastrous accident in Thorney Passage off Lincoln National Park, and a lot of the offshore islands in that area are named after the 7 crew that he lost on that trip. We also recognise that there's been a lot of interesting European exploration in that area. The French were there. You'll see a lot of French names on some of the locations we travelled past, and even earlier than the French and the British, there were the Dutch there as well. So we'll see and speak about some of their history on this trip too. Next. The beaches are stunning. Like you often see beautiful photos of white beaches and tropical islands, but the beaches off these coasts are equally beautiful. On a sunny day, you could imagine you were up in the tropics. Swimming's not quite as warm, but there are opportunities to go swimming, and if there's interest and the conditions are good, there's even the opportunity to go snorkeling and checking out some of the underwater environments that we go past as well. So that's something you can do on these cruises. There's plenty of opportunities to land and just go for lazy walks along the beach, and the guest lecturers are a part of that process as well. If you want to join us, we can point out any interesting things we find along the beach, and because there are remote areas and there are often very diverse offshore reefs, there are all sorts of interesting things that wash up and interesting sea creatures we can see just off the shoreline as well. Next. Some of the most amazing islands that most South Australians never get to see, we get to visit on the ships. One of these was Wedge Island. I'm not sure, Will, you might know whether we sort of scheduled to land on this island as part of the tour. Last time, because of the stormy weather, we just got to sail past and we didn't get that opportunity. Wedge is one of the larger islands. It was actually farmed in the early days and suffered from land clearance, but that nowadays has made it the perfect place to reintroduce some of those threatened species that used to occur on offshore islands in some areas and were threatened on the mainland. So there are a number of islands which will travel past that have threatened species reintroduced to them. We can, if we land, we might get to see some of those. I think Wedge has got Pearson Island rock wallabies on it, for example, amongst a few other things. So hopefully we get a chance to land. If we don't, it's called Wedge Island because the seaward side has these enormous cliffs, I think in places up to and over 300 metres high. And when I went there in the early days, I didn't get to see if it's still there. This time there was even a wrecked ship perched partway up on the bottom of the cliffs. So it'd be interesting to see if that's still there now.
And just my 2 cents worth, Peter. Yeah, so we do aim to land on Wedge Island, but it's one of a handful of locations that's very weather dependent, just on the lack of suitable landing points, and it really just depends on the sea and the wind conditions as to whether or not we can get on land there. But absolutely, certainly that would be the aim. So moving on, so that was just a brief highlight of the wild islands of South Australia. We move on to our next and final couple of itineraries. We've got two across the Great Australian Bight, which is a 13-night Fremantle to Adelaide trip, which departing in October later this year. And then we've also got what we're calling Australia's Great Southern Coastline. This is an additional night, 14 nights, and it's Melbourne to Fremantle, departing early, February next year in 2024. We've kind of grouped both of these expedition itineraries together because, as you'll see from the two maps, there's a lot of doubling up in terms of the locations we visit, but we'll try and highlight in the next few slides if it's unique to a particular itinerary. But both, as a loose rule of thumb, both of these itineraries relatively similar, but just due to the sailing schedules over the next 12, 24 months. This one departing next year is just an additional night and has the addition, as you can see, of Apollo Bay, the 12 Apostles, and Port Fairy, compared to the 13-night one, which obviously finishes in Adelaide from Fremantle. So just moving on, over to you again, Peter.
I have to confess to start that I haven't actually done either of these cruises, so I'm speaking as someone who's been to a lot of these places on the mainland. So I think it'd be an amazing experience to see them from the sea, because you get a unique perspective that no one else gets to see generally. Plus, the other advantage with the coral trips is you also get to land in a lot of these places and see them from the land as well. So this is Cape Naturaliste is presumably one of the first places you get to land on these trips. It's part of that wonderful southwest area of Western Australia. It's a site of another lighthouse in a rugged area of country. I think this is called Pyramid Island off the coast here. It's It's the northern extension of a chunk of land that's matched on the southern end by Cape Lewin, and in between you've got the wonderful Margaret River area. Some of my favourite country in Australia, you've got these astounding tall Jarry and Karri forests, as well as this wonderful wine growing area with lots of boutique food places. It's just a wonderful area to visit. You get the pleasure of doing it from the sea and the land. And once again, the culinary team on board the ship will be using Western Australian produce and wines to enhance your experience while you're out on the boat. So you get the best of all worlds, really. Next. And this is the other extension down off the coast of Victoria. You get the wonderful rugged coastline. Most see it via the Great Ocean Road. You got the rainforest areas, southern temperate rainforest areas, as well as fantastic coastal features like the 12 Apostles. You get the unique experience on one of the coral ships of seeing them from the coast. It's also known as the shipwreck coast, but that needn't concern us these days. That was a bit of a threatening area during the good old days, but nowadays it's a much more comfortable and safe experience. Another wonderful place to see marine wildlife, and our furry seal friend up in the photo there is actually an Australian fur seal. So in South Australia we get to see what used to be called New Zealand fur seals, now called long-nosed fur seals. This is an Australian fur seal, and I think on this coastline there's the largest breeding colony in Australia. They're the largest fur seal in the world. It's a species that has a subspecies in southern Australia and also in South Africa. So it's a large fur seal species shared with those two locations, which hopefully you'll get to see on these trips.
And just again, my 2 cents worth, obviously the 12 Apostles and Apollo Bay and Port Fairy is just available on the cruise departure in 2024, Melbourne to Fremantle, Australia's great southern coastline. And yeah, once again, wildlife experiences on Kangaroo Island. You don't miss out on that wonderful part of the world. And the tour of the Cape Willoughby Lighthouse as well, and fantastic views from the top there over Backstairs Passage and over towards Victor Harbour in the east as well. So yeah, you don't get to miss out on that wonderful experience there. Thanks. So just before you start, so the following slides, guys, so just mentioning obviously that both quite similar itineraries departing this year and next. In the following slides, you get to visit all of these destinations, no matter if you choose the 14-night or the 13-night departure. So over to you, starting over in WA, Hamlin Bay, one of my personal favourite places I've ever visited. But over to you, Peter. Yes, it's just a beautiful big arc of white sandy beach, and one of the special things about it is it has regular visitation from large stingrays and eagle rays, which you can easily see from the explorers, and potentially, if conditions are good, I assume you get the opportunity to go snorkeling there and have a look at them underwater as well. When we were over on Coffin Bay Peninsula, we had an experience with rays in the water there as well. So it's one of those things, the more country you cover, the more likely you are to see some of these things. So it's not just a once-off visit and you put all your eggs in one basket. Because these voyagers visit a large number of areas, it greatly increases your chances of seeing some of these amazing animals. Thanks. And delicious oysters from the waters of Coffin Bay. One of the special things about these waters that to make these oysters so sought after is that the waters are very, very clean. There aren't any major rivers that run into the Coffin Bay area at all, so there's no silt and detritus carried from the mainland out into the water. The waters are very clean. Oysters are filter feeders, so what they suck in to get their food, the water they suck through their bodies to get their food is very clean, so they don't have heavy metals or all the nasty things you often hear about in Northern Hemisphere shellfish. Has a very, very clean. The flesh is delicious if you're into oysters. I know not everybody is, but even if you're not into eating them, just seeing where they're growing in those
offshore aquaculture frames in these beautiful aqua-coloured waters. If the weather's good, you get to do a tour out there to see all that firsthand. Last year, the weather wasn't good, so we couldn't do that, but the oyster growers actually came on board the ship and gave a really interesting lecture for us, and we had tastings on board the ship, so no one missed out on that experience, which was wonderful. And they're paired with South Australian wines as well, so you get to have that experience of eating the oysters accompanied by some delicious wine as well.
Next. And just to follow on from what Peter was saying, I actually, myself and my family spent about 3 or 4 months in early 2020 during the first major kind of COVID lockdown, stuck, for lack of a better words, down in Coffin Bay. It's an absolutely spectacular part of the world, both Lincoln National Park, Coffin Bay National Park. I ate way too many oysters during those kind of 3 or 4 months. But again, just backing up everything that Peter said, it's a really special, remote, barely populated part of the world. And yeah, getting to experience the oysters is a real highlight of the kind of culinary side of the trip.
And going back to the Margaret River area, it's another one of those special boutique wine growing areas of Australia. It's an area that specialises in cooler climate wines, so they do fantastic cooler climate white wines as well as red wines. I assume everyone gets to taste a good variety of those on board the ship. I don't know if there are any land-based tours of any of the wineries at all, or whether you get to see the wineries, Will, as part of
absolutely. So yeah, with both of the 23 season and 24 season across the Bight trips, no matter the 13 or 14 nights, we get to visit one of my personal favourites, Lewin Estate, which is one of our land-based trips where we have lunch, full wine tasting. We get an exclusive presentation from the owners and people who run the Lewin Estate there, and is a real highlight. And of course, encourage you to buy as much wine as you desire. But yeah, the Lewin Estate, famous for its Art Series wine, one of my personal favourite experiences when I was over in WA. So absolutely, we get a chance to indulge in the liquid delights of Margaret River.
One of the things that happened on the cruise I did was we actually had a wine tasting evening on the boat. Is that something that normally happens as well, Will?
Yeah, look, absolutely as well. So you touched on it earlier, and no matter where we cruise, be it Tassie, South Australia, we try as hard as we can to utilise the local food and wines of the area. So again, in Tasmania, you'll be enjoying the local single malts, and in South Australia, we absolutely try and focus on South Australian wine and food, be it Coffin Bay oysters or the abalone from Flinders. Whereas over in WA, yeah, it's WA sourced produce and a real focus on the spectacular WA wines as well.
So yes, going back to Cape Leeuwin, which is the point, an extremity on the coast in Western Australia, basically where the Indian and Pacific Oceans meet. So heading south from the Perth or Fremantle in the Indian Ocean, as soon as you go around the corner, you're on the Southern Ocean. So things get very spectacular then. As I mentioned earlier, you've got the full force of the Southern Ocean pounding these coastlines. In this picture here, you can see how the granite shelves have been exposed. The limestone capping has been blasted away by the big swells over the millennia, exposing the granite. Having said that, on the ship that I was on, the Geographer, last year, we had those big storms, as I mentioned earlier. The captain and the crew were so skilled at manoeuvring the ship into sheltered areas and keeping everybody comfortable. We just ate and continued on as normal, slept quite comfortably. I had one of the roughest trips of my life in a ship, which was the Tasman ferry going over to Backstairs Passage once, where I was actually, my feet were lifting off the bed at night. The waves were so big, and we had big seas on this trip, but the captain managed to find sheltered spots and not disturbed at all. We had extremely comfortable conditions and hardly felt like we were experiencing any sort of stormy conditions at all. We had spectacular lightning storms from the ship, but as far as we were concerned, we were very safe and comfortable, and it was just an amazing way of seeing it all without feeling at risk at all. Going back to the coastline, this is the Cape Lewin Lighthouse, and this is, I think, one of the tallest on the Australian mainland. I assume we get to do a tour there, Will? Is that one of the landing?
Absolutely. For any of you who are inclined, I forget the number of steps to head up to the top, but yeah, I think it is the tallest lighthouse in mainland Australia, certainly. So anybody so inclined can make their way up to the top, and I'm assuming you get pretty nice views from the top there.
Okay. And I mentioned earlier there's limestone capping on those granite rocks. In the higher rainfall areas inland, there's this amazing formation called Jewel Cave. It's got 3 huge chambers. It has a reputation for its crystalline cave formations. We get guided tours there, and I went there many years ago, so it'd be amazing to go there again. That's just mind-blowing cave formations, which you get to see as part of the tour on the ship. And another amazing group of islands, the archipelago of the Recherche, first named by the French explorer d'Entrecasteaux, hence the French name this time, named after his ship called the Research in English. Amazing archipelago of islands, generally inaccessible to the public. The coral ships get to land on Woody Island, which is the only one accessible to anybody, and get to explore that. Yeah, a really unique experience. A lot of these islands, like their South Australian equivalents, were once connected to the mainland during the Ice Age and had a whole lot of species trapped on there when they were isolated again. So there are all sorts of threatened plant and animal species that only occur or mainly occur on these islands these days. So that's one of the unique features that we get to see as our visit to one of these islands. And one of the other beautiful national parks in the area is Cape Le Grand, area called Lucky Bay, named on Flinders because they were desperate for a good place to land their boats and found this sheltered spot in amongst all these islands. More unique wildlife experiences. These are western grey kangaroos again, the mainland subspecies of those. Years ago when I was camping there, I had the pleasure of seeing a tiny little honey possum climbing around on a grevillea. So you never know what sort of wildlife experiences you'll have. For me as a botanist, Southwest WA is my idea of heaven. It's one of the biodiverse regions of the world for plants. Springtime is just mind-blowing, but there's so much diversity. It doesn't matter what time of year you go there, there's always something interesting flowering. So just seeing the wildlife, but for me in particular, the botany is just mind-blowing. So in the geographer or the coral ships, you get to land and experience all that firsthand, not just seeing it from the boat.
And just from my viewpoint as well, Cape Le Grand National Park, from a kind of humble person from the UK as well, one of the most spectacular stretches of coastline I've ever visited. The beaches are truly jaw-dropping, you know, silica sands, that type of thing. So yeah, a really special part of the world. So thank you, Peter, for your kind of insight into some of those destinations. We're coming to the end of our presentation, guys. This is just a really short 2-minute video that just gives an oversight of some of the destinations we go to on the south coast. It also gives you a couple of minutes just to type, if you have any questions, to type them into your chat function on your computers. I've got quite a few that have come through already. So 2 minutes. Put some questions in if you have any, and then once the video's finished, we will do our best between me and Peter to answer them. So thank you very much, guys. I've had lots of questions popping through during the course of the presentation. So moving swiftly on, and we'll try and keep this as brief. I appreciate we've gone over our kind of 45-minute window, guys. So straight away, we covered it a little bit during the presentation, but one of them was how many opportunities have you got for swimming and snorkeling across the three kind of cruise itineraries? And before I potentially hand to you, Peter, look, absolutely, we've got a multitude of opportunities to jump in the ocean. From Hamlin Bay, Lucky Bay, Recherche Archipelago, Coffin Bay, Kangaroo Island. Yeah, an absolute myriad of opportunities. As Peter mentioned, and as I find out to my surprise when I was down there myself, the water straight up from kind of Antarctica and the Southern Ocean there can be a little bit nippy, even in the height of summer. But absolutely, a lot of options across all three cruise itineraries. To get into the water. Coral will provide you with your personal snorkel gear and a beach towel at the beginning of the trip, which you can have for the duration of the cruise. I don't know if you want to add anything further to that, Peter?
Just to say that Southern Australia has the equivalent of the Amazon rainforest in marine algae or seaweed species, so it's well worth taking a snorkel to have a look at some of those plant communities underwater, as well as some amazing marine life as well that you won't get to see anywhere near as well from the surface as you would underwater. So yeah, certainly if there's an opportunity to put the snorkel on and go for a dive, then it's absolutely worth doing. And also the Lewin Current, which runs down the Western Australian coast and around through the Bight, is a tropical current. So you get, particularly on the Western Australian southern coast there, you get an interesting mix of warm weather or warmer water species as well as colder water species. So that's something to look out for as well.
Thank you. So moving on, one of the questions was, are there any days without landing on land? Yes and no is the short answer to that. On the coastal wilds itinerary of South Australia, of which Peter is the one of the guest lecturer team of that, absolutely not. You will have usually a minimum of 2 shore excursions on a daily basis. No matter where we cruise, be it South Australia, the Kimberley, Tasmania and beyond, we try really hard to reposition the ship on an overnight basis, so you wake up in a new destination each day. So no, South Australia, Wild Islands, absolutely, you're going to be getting a minimum of 2 shore excursions on a daily basis. With the 2 13 and 14 night itineraries, again, with the possible exception of the crossing across the Great Australian Bight, basically, where we cruise along the Bunda Cliffs, the famous sea cliffs that I'm sure everybody is aware of. That might be a day that is just viewing these cliffs from the comfort of the ship. But other than that, no, absolutely, we have got shore excursions on a daily basis across all 3 of those itineraries. So a question for you, and I'll link a couple if I may, Peter. So what is the likelihood of rough seas, on the Wild Island cruise in November? And maybe, what time of year is best?
Well, given my limited experience, as I mentioned before, we did have some rough seas, but because of the complexity of the coastlines that we're visiting, there are always sheltered places that the boat can go to be protected and give people an experience. So as Will said, there's always an opportunity to land, even though we had some pretty rough weather last time. Every day we managed to find a place where we could do a safe beach landing. No one fell in or got wet or anything like that. It was all well controlled and organised, so no one missed out on those sort of experiences. We even had the opportunity to travel down the southern side of Kangaroo Island, which wasn't on the schedule at all because we had these strong northerly winds, so it was actually safer to go along the south coast. So we got to see a whole part of Kangaroo Island that wasn't even on the trip schedule. So part of being an explorer is going with the flow and making the most of your opportunities. And if everyone is in that frame of mind, they won't be disappointed. I think we'll always find something interesting to see and do.
Yeah, and just to follow on from that, Peter, as well, is for those of you who have cruised with Coral before, you might have jumped aboard our smaller kind of yacht-like vessel, Coral Discoverer, which we tend to use in domestic waters exclusively, but we don't send it out on some of our big, open ocean crossings. Both Coral Adventurer and Coral Geographer are two newer and larger ships. Have been purpose built to cruise open ocean if we need to. So last year, for example, we had our inaugural cruise series right across the Indian Ocean, and later this year we send one of our ships up through the Indonesian islands, up through Philippines, all the way to Japan. They've got onboard stabilizers, but they've been designed to not only cruise those kind of shallow coastal waters, but the wider open oceans. And again, one of the ships even goes down into the sub-Antarctic early next year, basically, to enjoy those sub-Antarctic islands. So they're geared towards, open oceans. And as Peter mentioned, our itineraries really depend on the type of weather that we're going to get on each specific voyage. And so they're always, amended as required, but we will always find, a local sheltered bay to get you guys aboard on shore excursions as required. So moving on, as I know that we are rapidly running out of time, a couple of questions that I can answer. Wi-Fi connection on board, it always gets asked in the presentations that I host. 6 months or so ago, I would say in certain more remote areas, very, very dodgy. Coral Expeditions spent a small fortune very recently in the last 6 months to get Starlink, old Elon Musk's old Starlink technology on board. And from what I've been told by our onboard crew, the Wi-Fi is now better than head office Wi-Fi that I'm using today. So absolutely no issues in terms of staying in contact with friends and family, posting photos, that type of thing. Standard Wi-Fi comes included with the with what you've already paid on board, and like I say, that will cover you for uploading photos and all the Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp messaging that you need to do. If you're the type of person that wants to, stream movies and that type of thing, and I must say you're probably not going to have the time to do so. It's a pretty full-on expedition experience, but we do offer a premium service which is at an additional cost. But that again would only be if you were, God forbid, needing to have work meetings on board or that type of thing, or stream big, chunky movies whilst you're on board. But most people find the included Wi-Fi options more than suitable for keeping in contact with friends and family. Can you use drones and drone photography on board? The short answer is no. Unless you get prior permission from us here at Coral Expedition and the ship's captain. There are certain national parks that we go to that are just outright banned. Short answer no, but please feel free to approach us if it's something that's going to be crucial to your experience. Is there a doctor or nurse on board? No, again, it's a short answer. On any of our domestic itineraries, we don't have an onboard doctor and or nurse. We do on our international expeditions, but not domestically. Is the cruise all-inclusive? Short answer being yes. So all of our shore excursions, obviously all of your meals on board, your guest lectures and expedition team, all alcoholic drinks are included during lunch and dinner service. But if you want to enjoy a cheeky G&T or a cocktail outside of those lunch and dinner services, that would be an additional cost. We do have laundry facilities on board, but that would be a small additional cost as well. But in short, what you pay is an almost all-inclusive experience in terms of food, shore excursions on the itineraries that you've chosen. One for you, Peter. So on the Coastal Wilds trip of South Australia, and you touched on it briefly in the presentation, how strenuous are the walks, and are there options for people that would like somewhat strenuous and some that maybe don't?
Certainly some of them are up over rocky ground. I think the Stanford Hill one is climbing up some rocky slopes, so that can be as strenuous as you want it to be. It was think about 5 or 6 kilometres as a circuit from memory. So that was probably about as strenuous as it got in terms of going up and down and over uneven ground. Any of the beach walks, if you wanted to go for a jog or something, there's nothing to stop you doing that. But as I say, I'll be travelling slowly, looking for interesting things to point out to people and for my own curiosity. So the main aim is to soak in the environment and explore and find things that we may have never seen before and identify them for you. And having said that, the ships all have a library on board as well. So I carry my own set of books with me. So if there's something that we find that we're not sure about, we can check it out together later when we get back on board the ship and see if we can figure out what it is. That's part of the adventure.
Thank you very much. And look, I'm going to handle the last 2 questions that have just dropped into my inbox before wrapping the presentation up. So look, one is what time of year is best? And that's kind of open-ended question, you know, how long's a piece of string? But we've been doing these itineraries for many, many years now. And I think what we found, or the reason that we travel in kind of late spring, early summer is it's got the least, and you know, covering WA and South Australia is quite a wide geographic region. But we try and do it then because the ocean tends to be you know, relatively flat, i.e. less chance of storms. There tends to be less of a chance of you know, heavy rainstorms, and it's also the perfect time of year in terms of climate that we're moving into summer. So we've got some beautiful clear skies and warm days without the kind of baking heat that maybe later summer potentially gets us to. And then last question, any limitations on luggage size or weight for the Wild Islands cruise? No, the short answer is no. We have a duty manager that obviously oversees the joining and departure on each cruise itinerary, no matter where they are. And some of the comments they come back with, we've had some people turning on literally with, you know, carry-on luggage for a 10-day trip or something like that, and we have people turning up with multiple suitcases and everything in between. So look, absolutely not. Please, you know, pack what you would like to bring. I'll hark back to what I said at the beginning of the presentation, that absolutely, if you would like to, you know, dress for dinner, that's totally up to you. It's a really informal, relaxed, you know, onboard experience. We don't demand that you turn up in tuxedos for dinner. If you want to, totally up for you. So there's no need to pack the beautiful tuxedos and cocktail dresses unless you want to. But yeah, look, there's no luggage limitations, you know, within reason. I think, you know, anything from an overnight bag to model suitcases is going to be absolutely fine. I've just pretty much gone over the hour, so apologies, guys, for really blowing out my kind of 45-minute kind of time scale. As you can see, the southern region of Australia, from, you know, the highlights of southwestern WA and obviously the islands and coastline of South Australia, it's a really special part of the world. And like I say, speaking from my own personal experience, it's a beautiful, stunning part of the world. And I want to thank you, Peter, for providing a little bit of expert insight into the region. For any of you who have already booked on board these cruise series, you know, I hope you have a fantastic time. And for those of you joining us today that are just considering your options for this year or the next, hopefully we've excited you and encouraged you to reach out to us. The Explorat email address will take you through to our reservations team, as will the 1-800 number. Or again, please feel free to reach out to your travel agent as required. And hopefully we get to see you aboard soon. Again, thank you, Peter. Really appreciate your insight today. Thank you to all of you out there who have joined us for a little bit a chat of the local area. Apologies for going over my 45-minute window. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and we will leave it there. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.